Have you ever just looked at a forest or a meadow or even that little plant on your windowsill and really wondered, how did all of this get here? Well, today we are diving into one of the greatest stories on Earth. It's the incredible, epic journey of how plants evolved from the humblest beginnings to literally conquer the entire world. And it all kicks off with one simple question.
I mean, it's a pretty wild question when you think about it, right? Because that's really where this whole story gets started. Not with massive redwood trees or beautiful flowers, but with, well, simple, slimy, green algae just floating around in the water. So how on earth did that become the vast green kingdom that literally shapes our planet today?
Well, the answer is this incredible series of brilliant evolutionary moves that happened over 400 million years. This chart you're looking at, it's basically the family tree for all of plant life. And if you look way down at the base of the trunk, that's our starting point, a common ancestor that plants share with green algae. From that one single origin, every single plant we know today branched out, and each new branch represents a huge adaptation to a brand new challenge. And the very first challenge, you could argue the biggest one of all, was making that massive jump from the comfort of the water onto dry land. I mean, this was a totally hostile new world, and it came with a few major problems.
Just think about it for a second. The second you leave the water, you're hit by the air, which means you could just dry out and die. There's no water to hold you up anymore, so suddenly you've got to fight gravity all on your own. And here's the kicker. How are your reproductive cells supposed to find each other if they can't swim? These were the huge, fundamental hurdles that the very first land plants had to figure out just to survive.
So, who were these brave pioneers who first took on the challenge? Well, meet the bryophytes. A good way to think of them is like the amphibians of the plant world. You know these guys. These are the mosses, liverworts, and hornworts you see in all those damp, shady spots. They were the very first to make it onto land, but they could never really stray too far from the water's edge. Sure, they developed a kind of waxy coating to keep from drying out, but when it came to reproduction, they still absolutely needed water so their sperm could swim to the egg. They were basically stuck between two worlds.
Okay, so to really get how they and, all other plants reproduce, we have to talk about this really important concept, alternation of generations. Now, it sounds super complicated, but it's actually a really elegant strategy. It's just a life cycle that has two distinct phases that take turns.
So here's how this two-part cycle works. One part of the plant, which we call the sporophyte, its job is to produce spores. Then those spores grow into the second part, the gametophyte. The gametophyte's job is to produce the gametes, the sperm and eggs, which then fuse together to create a brand new sporophyte. And then the whole cycle just starts all over again.
So the really crucial difference is this. The sporophyte has two sets of chromosomes, that's the 2N part, while the gametophyte only has one set, or N. And get this, in mosses, that green, leafy carpet-like stuff we see, that's actually the haploid gametophyte generation. The sporophyte is just that tiny little stalk that sometimes grows out of it. Now, you're going to want to remember that because the whole situation is about to flip, big time. All right, so the next huge leap forward for plants was a total revolution. To really, truly conquer the land, plants had to figure out how to build their own internal plumbing. See, on land, sunlight is everything. It's food. And if you're stuck low to the ground, you're just going to get shaded out by all your neighbors. The only solution was to grow up, towards the light. But to do that, you need a way to get water from the ground all the way up to your leaves, and a way to get the sugar from your leaves back down to your roots. What you need is vascular tissue. And that is the superpower of the pteridophytes, which you probably know them as ferns. They developed these two amazing tissues, xylem to act like a straw carrying water up, and phloem to carry the food down. This was a game changer. It allowed them to grow true roots, strong stems, and leaves, which let them grow way bigger and taller than the mosses ever could. And check this out because it shows that big flip I was talking about. Remember how in mosses the gametophyte was the main part of the plant? Well, look here at the fern. That big leafy plant that we all recognize, that's the diploid sporophyte. The haploid gametophyte is now just this teeny tiny heart-shaped thing on the ground. The balance of power between the two generations has completely flipped. So ferns were a huge success, dominating the planet for millions of years, but they still had one big weakness. They still needed water for fertilization. The next great innovation would finally, once and for all, cut that tie to the pond and let plants conquer even the driest parts of the planet.
and that was the invention of the seed.
I just love this analogy because it is the perfect way to describe what a seed is. It's this protected, mobile, totally self-sufficient little package. Inside, you've got the embryo. That's the baby plant. It's surrounded by its own food supply. That's its packed lunch. And the whole thing is wrapped up in a tough, protective seed coat. The suitcase. Just brilliant.
So the seed solves one problem. But what about getting the sperm to the egg in the first place? Well, that's where pollen comes in. Pollen is basically the male gametophyte all packaged up and ready to be carried by the wind, no swimming needed. This amazing 1-2 punch of pollen and seeds, which was pioneered by the gymnosperms like pine trees and cycads, was a total game changer. And for about 200 million years, think about that, the entire age of the dinosaurs, these were the absolute kings of the plant world. Whenever you picture a Jurassic landscape, what you're really picturing is a world completely dominated by gymnosperms, reproducing that with flowers, but with cones. But of course, evolution never, ever stops. The final great innovation was so incredibly successful that it completely transformed the planet, painting it with all kinds of color and creating the world we recognize today. I'm talking, of course, about the angiosperms, the flowering plants. The absolute masterstroke of the angiosperms was the flower. Every single part of it, the colorful petals, the pollen-making stamens, it all evolved for one main purpose: to get some help. Instead of just tossing pollen into the wind and hoping for the best like the gymnosperms did, flowers used all these features to attract insects and other animals, basically turning them into highly efficient, targeted delivery drones for their pollen. And they didn't stop there. After fertilization happens, they wrap their seeds in another amazing invention: the fruit. A fruit is basically a bribe. It's this delicious, tempting package that convinces an animal to eat it, wander off, and then deposit the seeds somewhere totally new, complete with its own little packet of fertilizer. It is an absolutely genius strategy for spreading your seeds around. Now, this unbelievably successful group breaks down into two main classes: the monocots and the dicots, and you can actually tell them apart pretty easily if you know what to look for. Monocots, like grasses and lilies, they start with one seed leaf, and their flower parts usually come in threes. Dicots, on the other hand, things like roses and oak trees, they start with 2 seed leaves, and their flower parts are typically in 4s or 5s. So let's step back and look at the whole story. When you see it all together, it's not just a collection of different plants. It's really a 400 million year epic of problem solving. Yeah, let's go back to our family tree here, because now you can really see the story unfold. The bryophytes made it to land. The pteridophytes reached for the sky. The gymnosperms finally cut their ties to water. And the angiosperms, they recruited the entire animal kingdom to help them achieve total global domination. Each new group built on the successes of the one that came before it. So what's the big takeaway from all this? It really comes down to these 4 great leaps. From simply surviving on land, to growing tall, to reproducing absolutely anywhere, and finally to partnering with animals to take over every single corner of the globe. This, right here, is how plants conquered the world. I mean, from creating the very oxygen we breathe, to forming the base of almost every food web on the planet, plants are what made our world livable. Their evolutionary story is, in a very real way, our story. And that leaves us with one last really fascinating question to think about. Having already transformed the world once, what will their next chapter hold?